Welcome, everyone. We are just going to start our town hall today. Thank you for joining us. For those of you on Facebook that are just tuning in, also those of you that are in here in the Zoom with us. This is if you hear my dog snore in the background, we're all working from home, we're staying safe, we're at home, and those kind of sounds are going to happen. This is a family town hall, so apologies for that in the get-go. This is our How Are the Kids digital town hall. I have heard from so many parents, grandparents, caregivers, really that are concerned, about the educational aspect for our kids right now, but also the questions, also the fears, the anxiety, how do we talk to them? How do we answer these questions for kids of different ages? How do we help them cope with this time? I believe that giving those resources to all of us that are in this situation with children, no matter how we have them in our lives, is important because it's going to ease some of the concerns that we are all having at this time. So I am thrilled to have a wonderful group of panelists here today, but I wanted to start out with a few little housekeeping issues about really how we're going to proceed tonight for this next hour. And I have a feeling we might go longer, so if you guys are willing, we'll all do that as well. There's a lot of questions. But so really the process today will be it's open forum for questions. We have some topics that we're going to talk about if you don't have questions, but please ask questions. If you're on Facebook, put questions in the comments directly, and we have moderators that will get those questions to us here in the Zoom. We also have those of you that are in the Zoom with us. Please go ahead and put your comment or raise your hand that you would like to be on. So we will get on to it now. Can everybody hear? If you are in the Zoom and you can hear us, just go ahead and put a 1 in the chat so we know that everybody's connected and can hear right now. And then we will move on, and we're going to introduce our wonderful panelists that I'm so thrilled and honored that have joined us for this important conversation. So I'm going to ask the panelists to go ahead and just talk about themselves for a minute or two. We have slides that kind of give you their bios, but why don't we start with Brad? Brad, why don't you go ahead?
Good afternoon. Hi, my name is Brad Snyder. And in addition to being the executive director of the Dion Initiative for Child Wellbeing and Bullying Prevention, which used to be the Bullying Center at Arizona State University before it spun off on its own, I'm the chair of the Arizona Adverse Childhood Experiences Consortium, which is the statewide organization that advocates for prevention and for treatment of people who've experienced trauma, especially children who've experienced trauma.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you for joining us today. And let's go on and introduce Dr. Tristi Nath.
I do treat adults as well. I typically, I have a private practice in North Scottsdale. I also am an assistant professor at Midwestern University for the Arizona Osteopathic Medical Association.
Thank you, Tristi, for being with us today. And our next panelist is Jill Leshin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jill Leshin. I have been an early childhood educator for over 25 years. I have a master's degree in elementary education, and I'm a certified reading specialist. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit tonight about how you can use books to help children through this very unusual time, and how you can help build connection and help them feel safe through children's literature. I'm the owner of Pre-K Academy, and we develop very unique brain-based learning techniques to help children prepare for kindergarten and beyond. I'm also a mom. That's my greatest pride and joy. I have a son, Benjamin, who's 18, and a son, Luke, who is 14. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you for joining us. And finally, we have Julie. Julie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Julie Sanowski, and I am very happy to join this esteemed group this evening to discuss the needs of our students. As a lifelong educator, I strongly value the social and emotional well-being of our students as well as our staff in our schools. And as many people have said, these are uncharted territories, and a lot of this is new to many of us. I'm a parent of two students who've gone through the Scottsdale schools, and a lifelong educator, and I care an awful lot about our kids and our community. So glad to be here.
Thank you all for being here so much. We are going to get started and see if we have questions come in, but we'll start with really kind of the basic question for tonight that really sets the premise, which is, have kids so far, and when they're asking us these questions, and the questions based on their age are going to be very different, right? They're different kind of things on their mind when they hear about what's happening with this pandemic. What do you recommend? How do we approach their questions? What should we tell them? What shouldn't we tell them? What's going too far in this case? What kind of guidelines and as a whole can we give the audience? So does Brad, you want to start?
Well, I think it's a balance, and I think that what we're seeing from a lot of child experts across the United States is not sharing. In other words, you do want to let your children know the truth about these issues. You want to stick with the truth, and you want to minimize hyperbole as much as you can. But the real key is in striking a balance between the time that you devote to the virus and the time that you devote to your family. You need to make very clear distinctions between those times. So if you're going to talk about the virus, that's okay, but make sure that you have time when you're not talking about the virus. And when I say when you're not talking about it, not only are you not like listening to the news, not only are you not having that discussion with your child, but you're tuning it out yourself. You're putting your devices aside and you're focused 100% on your child, and they know that you're focused 100% on them. So that's more the balance that we're looking to strike than the like too much or not enough information.
Makes sense, right? Is focusing on and having that dedicated conversation. Christy, what would you add to that? What are your thoughts on kind of, well, you and I talked about this a little bit before this, and I think you were saying, you know, is there a line of too much information, but maybe being more transparent is kind of what you were thinking?
Absolutely. The American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry has already put out Acts for Families on this particular question. And I think that it is that you don't want to kind of force too much information into your child. At the same time, it's important to also have an open platform so that they feel like it is something they can talk about, especially if they're curious. So just like with any other question with parenting, the balance of, you know, how much do you share and what's the right amount often depends on the child's developmental stage. So for example, you, Anita, have younger children, you know, like in that toddler / young child, early elementary school age, while I have kids who are in the middle elementary school age, how the language we might use or how much information we might share, we'll have to take that into context as well. And then I would say also from a child psychiatry standpoint, we always pay attention to those kids who are asking a lot of repetitive questions, kids who are vulnerable in that they've had prior losses or prior deficits or have had troubles with sleep or behavioral changes. That's an area where we would want to make sure that paying attention to the warning signs of our child and, you know, figuring out again, what's too much or what's too little.
Right. Okay. So definitely, obviously it's going to always be per child, you know, monitoring what they can handle, understanding their triggers. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more about what triggers are, what trauma is, and what resiliency means in this time as we go on. Jill, what would you add to this? I mean, you really focus on early education. Is there a component to, you know, the fear that this can create with kids of that age? You know, I have the two younger ones, and they hear virus and they kind of have this wild imagination about it. What would you recommend to parents?
Well, I agree with what the other panelists said, and it's really about a healthy balance. And the other thing to really pay attention to is it's not how much you're talking about it, but it's how you're talking about it, using age-appropriate language. I found some really good resources on the consciousdiscipline.com site, as well as fredrogerscenter.org. They have some really good language that you can use with the little ones. Another thing that I really caution parents to be mindful of is pay attention to not only how often are you talking about it with your children. I mean, definitely you want to designate some time to talk about it, but also talk about everyday normal things as well. But also I caution parents to be mindful of when they're talking to their friends on the phone about it, or to their spouse or other adults in the household. We may not realize this, but the little ones are listening to everything. They can hear everything, and they may not understand the language that we're using when we're doing adult-to-adult interaction. So just be really mindful of that. You know, every time you do talk about it or listen to the news, just be mindful. Are your kids around? Are they listening? Even if they're in the other room, they might hear something that will scare them. So just being mindful of that, keeping a healthy balance, and checking out some resources to help you with the appropriate language to use with your children.
Right, those are great resources. What we're going to do after this is send all the different resources that are mentioned tonight. I know Jill has some others, and we'll kind of send those out in a follow-up email to everybody. So, Julie, I kind of was thinking, you know, as we're also working on it, and this is kind of where you can shed some light. We're always working on getting kids back into the educational system right now. And I know the different districts are doing different things. Scottsdale's already started. PV's kind of figuring out what the next step is in terms of daily, week education. What part of that do we feel like is, you know, how do we answer this question in the mix with that? I mean, we want to keep them going into their regular curriculum and keep things moving so it seems normal, but there's this huge, scary thing happening at the same time. How do you bridge those two? And,
you know, my career, I've spent most of my time at the middle school level dealing with preteens and teenagers. Like I said, I also have children of my own, and I've taught at the elementary and high school levels throughout my career. And I think the bottom line is that kids are very aware, regardless of their age, that things are different right now for them. They're not back at school. Most school districts had their spring break and they haven't gone back. And for some students, this is stressful in itself. And they might be wondering lots of questions, not just about whether a family member will get sick, but if their friends are okay, if their teachers are okay, because their lives are very different than their normal lives. So I think it's really important to use those age appropriate words and having conversations and being honest with the kids. You know, that the measures that we're taking right now of staying home to stay safe are for a reason, so we do not get sick. And sometimes sickness happens to any of us regardless of what we do. So we're just trying to be very safe right now. I think that is a message that parents can share with their children regardless of their age, and getting down right, like good teaching practices, right down at the student's level, and have a calm eye-to-eye conversation with their child about, you know, people get sick all the time, and relate it back to, you know, most kids have been sick at some time and what it means. And we don't get to control everything. And I think it's important to not use the terms scary, but that it's different. And even though it can be very scary, the unknown can be to people, you know, from day to day and week to week. But I think it's important to continue to have that open and honest conversation at age appropriate levels for the kids. I think just the fact that they're not at school, like I started with, is creating stress for many kids and families.
Yes, for sure. And again, across the ages, and that's kind of what's been hard, I think, for parents. You know, I heard a story on NPR today actually about a lot of grandparents that take care of the kids and how they're managing with this combined stress of maybe different age groups, trying to figure out how to help them do their homework. But then there's also the element of, you know, they're worried about getting sick themselves, and that whole balance that we're kind of struggling with now. So I think what we want to do is see if there's any questions that have come in. I'm going to be completely honest with all of you watching. I have absolutely no view right now. So I don't know what any of you are saying. I don't see my slides. I don't see anything. So I'm going to use this forum, because I can't get anyone on the team to understand, to say, I need tech help in this room. So somebody will come and hopefully help me soon. But Andy, you can hear me. We have our meeting coordinator on right now. So if there are some questions, or if you want to make Jen have video, and maybe she can ask some of the questions that are coming in, if there's any coming in. We'll just kind of give that a second. If not, we can talk a little bit more.
There is a question up on the screen, and it says, how much information should we give our children? Maybe we can go with that.
Right. And that's kind of where we were leading with this. But yeah, if you guys want to talk a little bit more about, if they're asking specifically about the virus, and maybe, we know we're all seeing, and we all look at it every day, right? How many people are infected? How many deaths? Is that the kind of information at any age that we should be sharing? If anyone of you wants to take that.
I think that's a really interesting point, because I know I am plastered to the news, and a lot of adults I know are trying to keep abreast, partly because we're all trying to educate ourselves about what's happening. Nobody's in the know anymore. And so I think our kids are getting exposed to a couple of things. One, are constantly exposing ourselves to the media, which probably is exposing them to the media secondhand to a certain extent. And also the potential anxiety reaction. I think it was already said, and Julie had mentioned about how the children are typically, I think Jill too, are very aware of our anxiety level and what we're talking about. And so we are our kids' number one role models in how to deal with this. So as parents, it's so nice when you've gone through stuff and you see your child go through something that you've already experienced and you can guide them through it. But because many of us have never experienced anything like this, we literally are trying to cope with what is and simultaneously guide our children through it at the same time. It's always important as a parent to know that we're the pillars of our child's life, whether they're 3 or 17. And I think that's, an important piece to pay attention to, because all of us are probably taken off guard at some point in this process.
And we just got 2 questions that came through on the Q&A within this meeting. The first one is from Ann Myers. She says, what are some ways that teachers can continue to have emotional and educational support for their students?
Well, I can speak to that. I know in Scottsdale schools, many teachers are meeting with their students virtually on a daily basis. We have vulnerable populations within our public schools, and it's not just for socioeconomic reasons, but also academic ability reasons. And so I know right now that teachers are setting up and working with their students. Special education teachers are meeting and calling. They're meeting virtually, but they're making phone calls to parents of their students. And everyone is learning a new system right now, a new manner in which to educate their kids. I'd like to share something that I heard the other day from our governing board vice president, Patty Beckman, and it has really stuck with me, and I thought it was a lovely thing. It's about encouraging students, and it doesn't just have to be the high school level or middle school level students, but encouraging children to reach out to their classmates at these times. And whether it means, helping them with a math assignment that's posted for them, that the teacher has taught, that the students know who the children are in their classrooms that might have difficulties with certain lessons. And I think it would be a great opportunity here for us to be doing things differently and really extending the hand, teaching our students, our children, to extend their hand to one another and virtually assist one another. And it's funny that Anne sent that question, because I had a conversation with her today. And I don't think this just applies to students and teachers. I think that this really applies to all of us, of not just being on our devices, but having those conversations, not just texting. I think there's something real about hearing someone's voice and seeing their face that provides comfort. to all of us. And, you know, we both kind of agreed in our conversation how nice it was to not communicate through text or an email and pick up the phone and have those conversations. So to back up and answer Anne's question specifically, teachers are working extremely hard developing virtual classrooms where the teachers see their kids online and can interact face to face with them. Not all classrooms look like that, but they're doing a really amazing job being guided and supporting one another in the best interest of their students. So I'm glad Anne asked that question.
Yeah, if I can chime in too, you know, I think one thing that's important to realize is that our development happens in a very fluid way. We move forward and then we move backwards sometimes. We progress and we regress. And as our children are experiencing maybe emotions that they haven't experienced before, at least not this way, it's important to take that opportunity to maybe go back to the fundamentals of social emotional learning and development. And that fundamental is kind of self-awareness, right? So that's the very first thing that we need. Before we can regulate our emotions, we have to be able to recognize them. So for teachers who are in the classroom, you know, maybe you are dealing with an older grade, and maybe you've spent a lot of time in earlier grades identifying emotions, but I think there's opportunities here, and it might be warranted to go back and look at some of those very primary SEL lessons about helping students name their emotions, recognizing them, because the first step to self-management or being able to control those emotions is to be able to name them. And I suspect, and I'd like to hear what my colleagues have to say here, but I suspect our students are experiencing emotions that they haven't experienced before.
Yeah, to kind of piggyback on that, Brad, there's so many books out there that can really help facilitate a conversation about feelings and naming feelings. And I think that's particularly important for really young children, because a lot of times they haven't felt that feeling before. They don't know how to name it. They don't know what it is. And that's scary for them. And if they had the language to share that with you, I'm feeling scared, I'm feeling anxious, it's really helpful for them. And to go back to the original question from the viewer, I know that we service lots of preschools in the Valley, and the preschools are doing an excellent job connecting with their students. They're having Zoom lunchtime and Zoom story time. And the teachers are putting together little lessons and little scavenger hunts for the parents to do at home to keep the learning going so that the children are continuing to prepare, especially in preschool, for kindergarten. But it's fun and playful, lots of language, lots of movement activities. So kids are getting exercise and they're building that bonding time with their parents in a very stress-free environment. Also, I know a lot of schools are putting things online. I know in the school districts, they're doing that. But for example, we are putting all of our classes into a virtual format right now so that the children can continue to take our classes and see our faces and interact with all the different strategies that we use. And it's really great. It's actually it's been a great opportunity for parents to see how we teach their children and what does developmentally appropriate learning look like in the preschool years. So parents have been really excited about getting to be, actually, you always say you want to take a peek into your child's classroom. Well, here it is. You know, you're getting to be that little fly on the wall right now and watch your child interact with these virtual classes. And it's amazing that the parents are learning so much and the kids are excited to share that with their parents. So a lot of positivity can come out of this virtual platform as well.
One of the other that was posed.
I think so. I am.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh,
sorry.
That's okay. I'll go. Yeah. So we're back, guys. I think we're going to kind of move a little bit forward. So I wanted to just make sure, though, if any of the attendees have a question, you guys can raise your hand and we can bring you on, or you can put something in the chat. There's a lot of you on here. So if anybody has any questions, or we'll just kind of move to the next topic. This is a question that was submitted. Oh, let's see. Let me do one that came in. I think this is probably from Facebook. So before we go to what's on the screen, we're going to talk about what are some ways to address conflicting information with kids. So your kids hear from their friends on all the Zoom calls that we're doing that, you know, something is probably more scary than it really is, right? When it's kids talking, it might exaggerate. Whatever it is, it's conflicting information with really what's happening. Or, you know, their friends are both saying different things. How do you deal with that? Julie, you're shaking your head. Do you want to start?
Yes. It reminds me of a lesson I would teach with my students on sources of information. It's really important especially those kids that are hearing conflicting views and data shared depending on their source of information. It's so common because they see it in print, they hear it, they think it's real. And that's a different world than the panelists that we grew up with of understanding sources of information. I mean, by golly, we used encyclopedias to receive our information, and little kids now can receive information and visuals at the push of a button. And so I think it's super important that we have conversations with kids about sources of information and not always believing everything they see or hear, and directing the kids that are capable of doing this to the CDC and credible sources of information to share medical research-based information. And that's the information that I suggest that all parents really, if they're having, when they're having these conversations with their children about COVID-19, and Brad talked about this earlier a little bit, I think it's really important to not be overwhelmed and have constant chatter about this. I don't think it's healthy for adults, and it's definitely not healthy for students. But again, the source of information is so important. You know, the kids can relate to playing the telephone game where they whisper in the ear, and you can do this within a family. It doesn't have to be a large family. It could be 2-3 people. What did I say? You know, whisper in their ear and have them repeat it. Simple instructions, or something silly, and parents know this every day, that when they say something to their kids don't often understand what they heard the way it was intended. So it's really important to check and recheck with them to see, what their temperature is at in regards to what they know and what they're hearing, and correcting those fallacies so that students have accurate information. Great opportunity as well to explore side by side with research on accurate information and really what's going on. And there are sources that can be put into kid-friendly language, or the parent reading it from the CDC and then communicating it to their child in the age-appropriate language. So this is something that is not only relative to what's happening right now with COVID-19, but it's a great life lesson for adults and their children alike to monitor sources of information and make sure they're paying attention to the most accurate sources of information.
I would add on to that with regards to sources of information. The CDC, I definitely think, is a reasonable source. Listening to the epidemiologists and hearing about what they have to say. When we talk about conflicting information, I think sometimes I have to also pay attention to where that information is coming from. We always think about, when I teach my medical students, we talk about valid sources. And, when you hear of information coming from even our highest level of power calling COVID-19, the Chinese virus, we're dealing with stigma and things like that our kids are hearing, that our families are hearing. And I think that being said, this is such a new thing. It's difficult to tease out what is valid and invalid, which is why I think it is an important thing to pace ourselves with how much we're ingesting, especially when so much of this information is unfiltered. So again, sticking to the CDC and the epidemiologists, I would say, is a reasonable source for our parents, and referring only to those as we talk to our kids about it.
The other thing too, our schools actually do a really good job of teaching media literacy and teaching things like research skills and citations. And this is also to address a question that came through on the chat about recommendations for busy parents who are new to homeschooling. We don't have to answer all these questions for our kids. We can ask them how they would answer those questions. So if we are struggling with our child and our child doesn't know which information to believe, it could be very empowering for our child for us to simply say, why don't you tell me which one we believe and why? Have them go back to those skills that they were taught in the classroom, but also have them think about it. Because one of the things I'm terribly worried about with all of the coverage of COVID-19 is how helpless it can make us feel. So any opportunities we have that we can give our child so that they can take ownership of something. And it might be just taking ownership of how they can determine what information is correct. I think you'd be really surprised. And that becomes an assignment, and that's a legitimate assignment if you're homeschooling, and your kids will learn a lot from it.
That's right.
I wanted to kind of take what you're saying there, and this will move us into the next question a little bit. So the conflicting information, and I think, Brad, that's a good point of bringing that question back to them, because one of the things we're hearing, a lot of conflicting information, all of us, and I'm sure that children are as well, is how long is this going to go on? And that brings us to the idea of kids really needing and being used to, and Brad, you and I talked about this quite a bit on the phone, and I really wanted to kind of start with you. Resiliency really comes from those social interactions and those connections, and that's what they're used to. So what does this time look like, and how do we take what COVID-19 has become to our society, which is stay away from people,
right,
and take that messaging and make sure that our kids are okay with that?
Yeah, and to kind of share a little bit of our conversation, Anita, I've been concerned for weeks now, not just about the disease, which of course is frightening, but of how it's being talked about and what we're being asked to do, simply because we are being asked to separate ourselves from each other. And at its core, resiliency is strong relationships. And so if we're being asked to kind of put barriers up to our relationships to combat this disease, we are increasing our risk of feeling vulnerable and traumatized by this disease. So, there's a catch-22 that's happening here. And I think my response, and looking at the literature and looking at the responses coming out of the Harvard Center for the Developing Child or from ACE's Connection, I think that, the answer is to really make sure that we specifically address relationships. Too often, we go through our day and our relationships are things that kind of happen casually. Our conversations with our children are things that happen casually as we pass them in the hall or we're at the dinner table with them. And what I think we need to do now, and what other experts are recommending, is being very, very intentional with those interactions, making sure that you are putting everything aside to strengthen that, to have a conversation, not about COVID-19, but about anything that's happening in your life and their life. I think you can also apply that to their other relationships, that intentionality, so that when they are interacting with their friends, with their peers, with their teachers, that it's happening in a way that is free of distractions, that is only about that relationship. And I think that will help keep those relationships strong, and that will help those children be resilient.
Absolutely.
Jill, I wanted to see what your thoughts were on with younger kids, particular. When Brad and I talked about this, I reflected on, and our story, and last year when my husband, or 2 years ago now, was so sick and gone for so long, people kept telling me that they were so impressed with how resilient my boys were during that time. And what struck me finally, and I understood this talking to Brad, was that they were resilient whenever, but they didn't break down very often. And when they did, it was when all of a sudden it was just the three of us. And one of them would always say to me, well, now it's just the three of us, and he would have a breakdown, because they got so used to, we had kind of made a system of people and fun and activities for them to keep everything going so that they didn't notice. It was, and yes, it's not reality, but at that young age, they were 5 and 4 at the time, is that, how do you look at this and how kids are being isolated? We're all doing Zoom calls, pre-K classes are doing Zoom calls, but what's missing there?
Well, I think that it's really important. I really liked what Brad said about the intentionality. Relationships are so critical, especially with the younger children and with the older children, really across the board, and adults as well. So I think we need to, I really like what Brad said, be really intentional about making that part of, we're talking a lot, parents are concerned about the education and the homeschooling, and are they going to keep up with their studies? This is a big component of that. The social development of children is, our emotional development, that's just as important, if not more important than our academic development. So as you're structuring your day and creating your routine for your child, I strongly recommend that you schedule in some socialization time through like a little Zoom lunch with some of their friends, or, dial into a teacher and say, hey, my son or daughter really wants to just have a few minutes with you, FaceTiming with grandma and grandpa, and just keeping regular communication and socialization and making it fun. And special, like, wow, we get to talk to, Auntie Susu over in, Missouri, and we never get to talk to her during the day, but she's at home and we're at home. Let's chat. Let's do something together. And there's lots of ways. In my family, I know we've gotten all the cousins on, and we had a game night. And so my kids got to have a game night with their cousins who they see twice a year. So we're trying to create social opportunities in our home that are special and exciting and unique, so that we're looking at this this time, although none of us would choose this for our families or our children right now, it's here. And I see a lot of opportunities for us to pause and really build these connections with our children that I think that as a society, we really have lost with the busyness of our days. And it's like we have this beautiful opportunity and to reconnect with our children, our families, our friends with no guilt. You have to be at home. Right. This is what it is. Everybody's in the same boat. So there's a lot of opportunity right now to build relationships, and just think about if we really embrace this opportunity with our children and our friends, and we really build that foundation, think about that's going to carry through when they go back to school, when they, summer relationships, a lot of times in the summer, kids lose touch with one another. Well, they're learning how to communicate with each other when they're not face to face. So yeah, a lot of really neat things can come out of this. We just have to kind of shift our paradigm a little bit and figure out how can we make this special and unique for our children.
Right. It's a reflection on maybe what we've been taking for granted. Like, I love the idea of them, the cousins, oh, wow, we get to do this, but we could have always been doing it, right? Now I'm thinking about my kids and their cousins. Why not, right? You take it for granted that they're there and everybody's busy. And then, like Brad said, having that intentionality about it and making those efforts. We have an audience, or an attendee, I should say, that wants to talk, and we can allow him to come on and ask a question, or maybe did you just go ahead and chat it? I don't know if Bill, you want to say it out loud? Have him in here or no? I'm going to go ahead and read your question, Bill, unless we get to hear you, I think.
Find out if you can hear me.
Oh, there you are. I hear you now. Why don't you go ahead?
Hear me, but this is different than Zoom. I was expecting Zoom.
Well, this is Zoom. It's just a little bit, it's a webinar format, a little bit different, but we can hear you now.
Okay, well, Brad said something that implied, I believe, tapping into children's critical thinking skills to help them find answers about this trying time. And I'm not really convinced that our children are being taught critical thinking skills in Arizona. Maybe this is a period that could inspire some creating some lesson plans and looking at the whole education system here for, I'm not sure what I'm saying. I think that Brad has a lot of faith in the children's critical thinking skills. And I don't know that we're there.
So, hey, may I address first, and then we'll.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So first of all, you can never spend too much time practicing critical thinking skills. 100%. And I am very vocal in my opposition to how we use standardized testing in our schools today, specifically because they do not reflect critical thinking, and they take time away from activities that would be used to teach critical thinking skills. So in that sense, I completely agree. What I've seen is that students are taught it, but they aren't given enough opportunities to have it develop or have it be practiced. So if you take a third grader or fourth grader in a Scottsdale public school, they might be able to tell you what race means in terms of, restate the question, answer the question, cite the reason why you're answering, and give an example. A lot of them will be able to tell you that that's how they do it. Do they have a lot of opportunities to practice that kind of response to a problem? I don't think so. I don't think they have enough. So there's the other thing that they're being taught is media literacy. And I actually spent a big part of my day today talking with fourth graders from around the Valley about media literacy and how they can, what is cyberbullying and what they can do to prevent it. And they actually have a fair amount of media literacy. So it's there. We just need more opportunities for it to flourish. So I'm not entirely disagreeing with you, Bill, but I do have hope. You're right.
And I've always believed that that lesson plans, all different, any lesson plan can be modeled around something that has to do with critical thinking skills. I mean, I think the outcome of our education system so far has left people lacking in the kind of critical thinking skills that it takes to, for example, recognize a lying politician. Excuse me. But the practicing or the opportunities that you're talking about, I think can be made part of other lesson plans, history lesson plans, math, all the way through. But it might be a challenge. And what I don't know is, are the panelists the only ones that are visible, or are you seeing me?
We are not seeing you this time. Though.
Okay, so I can pick my
We're
notes.
just hearing you.
Okay.
Yeah. yeah, you're good. Thank you for that question. Did anyone want to add to that? Did we lose Julie?
I would love to.
Oh, there you are. Go ahead,
you.
Julie.
Critical thinking skills, along with collaboration skills, those are things they're not easy to see right answer, wrong answer. It's very dependent upon situations. And as Brad alluded to, that it clearly stated, actually, kids are not necessarily given the time to think things through. I wholeheartedly agree with a lot of what we teach in school is not something that is easy to assess because they are what I consider life skills and very situational. Critical thinking is one of them. Students often want a quick, easy answer. Parents that are at home are going to find this out. They'll be answering lots of questions. But I think with any good educator, the key is with great teaching is not giving them the answer, having them come to the answer with your guidance. And my students used to always, periodically a student would come up to me and ask me a question, and other students would say, "Did you figure this out yet?" She's not going to give you the answer. She's going to continue to redirect you so you can learn the answer. And that's something that parents can really take on now when kids ask questions or when kids are watching TV or their computer screens. You can ask some very engaging questions, giving them not a yes, no response, but giving them an opportunity to really critically analyze a situation, something as simple as their favorite TV show, and you can make this into a very rich learning opportunity and lesson. You can incorporate science into that. You can incorporate art into that. These are great opportunities, as Joe was saying, that to bring in things back into the home that have been absent, I think, for a very long time in most homes because of technology. We have opportunities now to have technology be a tool to then guide us to deeper, thoughtful learning opportunities, and it takes work. Thinking takes work. Critical thinking takes work on behalf of a teacher, but also on behalf of a care provider for kids, whether it's a grandparent or a parent. Often a question and then an answer leads to another question by a student. It's not uncommon. And so I think this is a time to focus on that quality of relationship. We're given the quantity of time here with one another. The challenge, I think, is going to be for us is focusing that time to the attention and making it good quality time and attention. So Bill, I hope I've answered that. I do feel like critical thinking skills are extremely focused on. It's just not something you hear about in the media. It's not something that's reported, because it's something that a child or an adult have to be given time to show and process information and then show their thoughts. And we're a quick, fast-paced push of a button society now, and this is a time to really put on those brakes and allow the answer to not be right or wrong, but maybe down the right path. I hope that makes sense to the listeners and viewers here.
It does to me, and I can imagine the frustration of parents trying to homeschool in using the opportunity to help the children find the answers themselves. Because in my limited experience in teaching in elementary school and teaching in community college, both levels, those are the times when the students get the most frustrated, because they just expect the answer. They just expect to be able to go online and there's the answer, or they get frustrated with the teacher walking them through the process of discovering the answer on their own. And but yeah, I'm not saying that. I agree with everything you say. It's a real challenge for the teachers too, and parents.
Anita, can I add something to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
So a great critical thinking skills there's so many opportunities at home to build critical thinking skills, and I think they're incredibly important. And I agree that with Brad that that children often don't have a lot of time to practice those skills, and we need more time for that. And I think that's our responsibility as parents to expand on the learning that happens at school. We need to also be educating our children at home. For little kids, where they're just developing language, little kids like to ask a lot of questions. Why? Well, that's a great time to say, well, why do you think? And every time they ask a question, answer it with a question. And the kids, it's really amazing how these little kids, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, they come up with the most interesting answers. And that's critical thinking skills right there. That's how we build the foundation for it. Another really awesome way to build critical thinking skills, and in a very warm, nurturing way, is during story time. When you read your kids a book before they go to bed, ask them about why do you think the character did that? What would you do in that situation? Would you do it like that? Do you have a different way to do it? And just really getting them to think about and think deeper, and getting them to really develop language skills to express their thoughts about the story. And you can also share share your critical thinking skills by speaking out loud. Well, I think the character did it because of this, and giving your reasoning behind it. And that modeling is helping children begin to learn how to do that for themselves inside their own brains.
Well, I agree.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Bill. We're going to move on because we are almost actually at 8 o'clock. We have a couple more questions we want to try to get to. Before we do that, panelists, can you stay a couple minutes longer if we need to, if people will have some questions?
Absolutely.
Everybody good with that? So we'll keep going for a little bit. One quick question, and I know, Brad, you said you would get back to anybody, and I think we all can get back to questions that weren't answered, but there was one that was pre-submitted I want to get to as well. But quickly, we talk about, this is you hear this a lot now, this is a great time to teach your kids hygiene. But what about, the question is kind of, what about if we take it too far, right? And that compulsive nature of like over being worried about germs and all that. How do we avoid that? And I actually want to give Tristy an opportunity to answer that first if she wants to.
So yeah, it is a good question because some of it is environmentally what we're experiencing, and that may create an imprint of trauma for some of the kids that we're dealing with. And as a result, they may become more compulsive or fearful of germs because of what's happening. There's also, however, a genetic component. Some of us are just wired for predisposition to these sorts of traits. And so taking that in combination, I would say the most vulnerable population are the folks, say, who are more predisposed to an obsessive compulsive phenomenon, or people who are, have family members that are genetic traits that are passed on with anxiety, that we need to pay attention to have a balanced approach on how we're talking about, so they don't develop germophobia. At the same time, it's very real. As you go, I went to Trader Joe's today and all the workers have gloves on. A lot of the shoppers had gloves on, and it's just the world as it is right now. So I don't know if we can shield our kids from that. I just want to bring up, because I heard a lot of this before with regards to resiliency and frustration tolerance. I do think that there is a connection to a certain extent, and that I've been dealing a lot just in this last week or two with my patients. A lot of them don't have the time to homeschool their kids all day, or have had other obligations that they've had to take care of. So they haven't been able to do a ton of lesson planning with their kids. And part of it, there's a ton of guilt that my parents are experiencing because they feel like their kids aren't getting enriched adequately, that they're not, learning in this process. I would say that the concept of developing frustration tolerance, that perhaps we can't always shield our child from all of these potentials, whether they're going to become germophobic, or whether or not we can, be there to create the exact curriculum that their awesome third grade teacher is able to provide for them. And that with that frustration tolerance, resiliency is something that can get developed. Nobody would want their child to have to go through something like this, but sometimes it's through hardship that we develop the ability to have tolerance for these sorts of experiences. And so that being said, I'm not sure if I answered the question in terms of, can we prevent it?
Yeah.
No, but again, it's not every child who's going to be a target for it.
Right. So, but it sounds like it could be a time of, if they are genetically just predisposed to it, it could be that time of, might be the trigger, right? And I don't know, Brad, if you had something you wanted to add about that, kind of these triggers that happen, and then we can kind of move to the next question if anyone.
No, I mean, Shristi said it exactly right. And, adversity can be very, very good for humans, especially if we're given an opportunity to process it and recover from it. When adversity keeps coming at us without a period of rest, that's when it becomes either trauma or toxic stress, right? And so that's why I was talking earlier about, about dosing this exposure out, allowing, if they're going to talk about COVID, allow for a moment to afterwards where there is no COVID around, so that they can recover and process that. Another key, and Shristi again knows this far better than I do, to some things like obsessive compulsive disorder, is not understanding or feeling out of control, right? And so if you don't know what is helping or what is working for you, you worry about what it is and you make wrong assumptions, or rather that's happening inside you. It's not a conscious, it's not a cognitive thing. And so that's why it's really important to have hard information out to them. If they don't know how they might contract the disease, then they will develop phobias about how they could contract it. So that's why it's really important to stick to the science on that.
Great. Let's see. I'm going to see what we can move to. I think if we want to move to the next slide, this was a question that was submitted, and I don't see it was submitted by Bonnie, and I don't see her on here, but I think it's a great question for us to talk about if we have some time. And it's really what is happening with our more vulnerable communities right now. What kind of outreach is being done? These are parents, these are families that already were struggling to get the right resources for their kids. What can we kind of tell people that's going on right now? I don't know if Julie, if you want to start with that one, or.
I think you're muted, Julie.
I'm muted now, I believe.
Okay.
There we go. Okay.
Yes, I mentioned earlier the idea of the term vulnerable, whether it's population or children. And it's, I understand that whoever asked this question is referring to special needs students or special education. But I think we also need to be considering other vulnerabilities like social emotional. We need to be thinking of socioeconomic. Well, let me just address the socioeconomic. Our students often, like 22% in our district, I believe, that on free lunch. That also means breakfast. So we have an amazing force working within our district, continuing to work behind the scenes to make sure students are being fed as they need to be fed. So there are people that are working to make sure those basic needs are met. Communication is ongoing. Teachers are having communications with their students and their parents. As far as students with their individual education plans, referred to as IEPs, I know there are specialists within the special education field, so not necessarily a classroom teacher, but when you think of specialists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, speech and language pathologists, all of those types of specialists are being encouraged to communicate with their students on their caseload, and that we have conversations and communications with parents working on IEP goals, the best that can take place. So we all know there's no perfect world. We're not living in one, and we will continue to not live in a perfect world. So we're doing the best that we can in regards to meeting those individual educational plan needs. The state and the federal government are also, this is all new. This is new territory. So these organizations, when you talk about that top-down, trickle-down information, since special education is one of the only federally mandated forms of education, it's not just a decision that can be made. There's guidance from the national government on this as well. So they're continuing to work on this. Nothing replaces that face-to-face interaction, especially with our special needs students. It becomes even more challenging for service providers to provide the services. I know there are teachers who are basically on call to the special needs families that they serve. So there's no consistent format right now on how the students' needs are being met, which I think is an interesting thing, because our students are not all the same as well. So depending on the students' needs determines how they're being, their needs are being addressed. And there are issues with FERPA laws and other laws where you have to be careful. There are some communications and some meetings taking place virtually. So with the use of technology, as IEP annual meetings take place, they're being encouraged, teachers and specialists are being encouraged to hold those with using technology. So no perfect system here to meet these students' needs, but it's definitely something that's on the forefront and is continued to be.
Thank you, Julie. Yeah, I think all our educators and our school districts, everybody's been working very hard to make sure that all children are getting what they need out of this. And as we said, figuring it out as we go, because it is such not normal times, not that we ever have the best of those times. Does anyone want to add to that a little bit? We can maybe do a couple minutes so we're not getting too far in. Anyone have any additional thoughts? Okay, so let's move on and kind of to close out. You know, we have put up some people that are still in the Zoom, and if you're on Facebook and you have a question, we can still get to a couple of questions quickly. So if there's any questions that you have, please put those in the comments on Facebook, and our moderator will let us know. But we also have a quick poll for anybody that's here, and on Facebook you can kind of answer these too. You can move this around on your screen so it doesn't block the rest of this, but I wanted to bring it up just so we can kind of see if your children have been asking those questions. Are you personally preparing? We've heard April 10th. I know it's kind of the new date in terms of when our schools will be closed until. People are thinking it could go longer, and what are you preparing for? And there's just some questions about, you know, your concerns about connectivity, having computers for your children right now, internet, if that's a concern. And then also just if you'd like to see more conversations like this. So those of you in the Zoom, if you want to take that poll, again, you can minimize it, move it off your screen. Anyone on Facebook, if there's any comments you want to make or questions you want to ask. We will, if we want to move on, really to kind of close it out, we've talked a lot about kids transitioning into this time. And, you know, we're too early maybe for this question, but it's something to kind of leave on that thought of transitioning out of this time. I don't know if we've given that much thought yet. You know, this was a huge change in the way we educate. It will be a huge change in the way we talked about resiliency and isolation versus, you know, that social core that kids have. What do we look for, or can we do now to kind of prepare for the next phase here? Who wants to start?
Anita, I would like to address the issue of technology access, if I could.
Yes, please.
So Scottsdale Schools has issued the use of laptops to students. Just received notification that families with 3 or more SUSD students enrolled can check out a second Chromebook tonight at Coronado and Ingleside. I would suggest that they reach out to the district office if they miss this checkout time.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
And we can send that out in our follow-up as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Does anyone have any thoughts on transitioning back?
Yeah, I mean, I've been involved recently in a lot of discussions about generational differences. And one of the things that defines a generation is something that everybody experiences at the same time at a very young age, right? And this might be something that defines this next generation, depending on how long this lasts, obviously, because typically these, you know, events that define a generation last 5 years or more. That being said, I think that there are lessons that we can take away from this. We can talk about this can be really important to help our children understand the difference between a luxury and a necessity. We can reevaluate things like consumerism. We can take this opportunity to look at what our global industrial complex has done to the environment and what that means when it comes to, in light of the lessons learned from COVID-19. So I think that it's going to give everybody a new perspective. And what I hope is that we don't just brush it aside as something tragic that happened to us for several months, but that we learn from it and we appreciate our relationships and we appreciate some of the more essential things moving forward.
To add to that, I think that it's, especially with little kids, that's kind of my area, is to really talk to the kids that this is temporary, and kind of have some conversations with them, ask them about what their typical day looks like at school, maybe create that routine and put it next to your routine that you're creating for your homeschooling, so they can kind of see, compare and contrast what's the same, what's different. But just continuing to talk about asking your child, what's your favorite thing about school? What are your favorite subjects? Who are your friends? Who do you like to play with? And just kind of keeping it present, that, talking about what the day looks like typically when we're not at home. And then also, generating a list as a family of the things that the kids are really enjoying about this time, and talking about how, how we could weave this into our day when we do get back to school, so they can kind of see that there's some gifts that they're going to bring with, that are going to be brought with this, back to when we get back to our regular routines. Here are the things that we're going to incorporate. Like, in my house, we've been making dessert after dinner every night together, and it's not great for the waistline, but we're having a great time together. And they're like, why don't we do this every night? And, maybe we need to have that once a week from now on. And we kind of talked about that. Maybe we could pick one night a week where this is what we do. We do a family cook-off, and we have like a little challenge. And, so talking about what you're going to bring with you as you transition back, the things that are positive, and keeping a dialogue and about what your typical day looks like, and talking about the positives that children see in their regular school day as well.
I think it will be really important for students to try to keep somewhat regular schedules during this time as well, so that they are preparing to go back to school, because it is very regimented. I think there are lots of opportunities, as we've discussed this evening, for students to not only see things differently and experience life differently, but also I think it would be in students' best interest to keep journals through this process, writing down their thoughts at the end of the day and at the beginning of the day, whether it's their concerns or things that they miss or things that they have new appreciation for. I think the journaling is very helpful, and for students who don't have the writing skills in place, they could just through art and coloring. So there are lots of ways for, instead of the doom and gloom, this is super scary, we can't control this mentality. I think it could be really a very therapeutic environment if we allow it to be, for families, establishing new norms, getting to know one another, taking the time to actually communicate. This is new for a lot of us. So I think keeping that positive and limiting that access to the doom and gloom is going to be so important. And I'm kind of excited here that there are so many kids that love being at school, and we're hearing about it from their parents and the appreciation of what happens every day. Because I know for educators, there are times when they're not feeling that love or that appreciation, and I think they're working extremely hard to create that new classroom setup for their kids. But I think the fact that kids are missing it says they were doing something that was right on target. So it's always look for that bright spot, and I think that's one of them.
I was just going to add to that as well. Of all the questions that we've gotten tonight, this is probably the most challenging, how to prepare kids for the future in this transition. I think I'm struggling with that concept altogether right now. I mean, my patients were just working on taking the here and now into context and trying to figure out how to add meaning and purpose to our current lives as it stands. And so it is heartbreaking listening to the stories of kids who's, they've worked so hard to prepare for their bar mitzvah, or knowing that their prom might not happen, or graduation might not happen, or some of the other things that are going to have to be put on hold or not happen at all. And that, again, I think Brad mentioned that this might define that generation. But unlike adults who've had years of experience and have had, you know, a different idea of what normal life developmental milestones might look like, I think that there's many of these kids who aren't going to know anything different from this being what their, you know, 6th grade year happened to look like. So I think that when we think about transitioning them, we might find kids are pretty adaptable to many environments. It's the environment that the parents are able to produce for them that counts. So honestly, I'm more concerned about our adults transitioning back than our kids at this point.
Mm-hmm. No, good point. Because I think that's where probably the question came from, was really our adult minds thinking, oh, this is going to be hard, and all the restructuring that we had to do and mentally kind of going back out. And it ties back into the germ side of it too, right? Feeling that it's safe, even though they're telling you that it's safe. That also, I think, will be another layer that we're going to have to deal with. The poll results are up. I don't know if everyone can see those, but if you want to take a look. We were going to go to closing thoughts, but I kind of feel like those were a little bit of those, but I want to give you each, if there's any questions, I'm going to ask one more time, both on Facebook or here, so that you don't miss your opportunity. We can take one more quick question if anybody has a question. And if not, then I think we'll go to just kind of, you know, a minute each, just really anything you want to leave people with at this time. And while you're going through your closing thoughts, we're going to put up a slide where people can reach you. You've all been so kind to share your time, but also contact information so people have follow-up questions. So we'll move on to that slide and then maybe kind of start with closing thoughts. And on my screen, Julie, you're on the top, so why don't you go first?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, in closing, I think, you know, this has provided a great challenge. I'm glad we're having discussions about it. I know a lot of people have felt very isolated at this time. This is a great opportunity to reach out to others, and whether it's your neighbors, a friend of mine, his family participated with other neighbors that they didn't know in a cul-de-sac charade, keeping that social distancing between families.
I like that.
Here's an opportunity for creativity and having fun in a very stressful, what could be a very stressful time. I think it's all about our attitudes, and which will impact our students and our families as well, our kids and their families as well. So, you know, thank you for those who are interested in creating a good learning environment for your child while they're at home. Thank you to the teachers and the school staff members who are working diligently behind the scenes to consider the best interest of the students on a regular basis and keep things going in their lives. And to the panelists, thank you for, I mean, I've learned a lot just listening to you tonight. So thank you all for making yourself available to our community, and to Anita for hosting this tonight. This was a great conversation. I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. And I'm going to mention that Julie, you see her information up there. She's also a candidate, which I wasn't going to promote, but it's important because she's wonderful. She's a candidate for Scottsdale Unified Governing School Board. So if you're in Scottsdale, you want to remember that. So thank you, Julie. Jill, some closing thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for showing up tonight, because you're clearly showing up for your kids. You're trying to find ways and to help support your children right now, and it's wonderful. And your kids need you. They need to feel safe. They need structure. They need routine. And flexible routine, because it's a different time and there's lots of emotions going on right now. But they need connection and communication. So I applaud all of you for being here and learning, and I appreciate the panelists. I've learned a lot tonight as well. Just remember, books are a great tool for teaching. If you like our Facebook page, the Pre-K Academy Facebook page, we are putting out supercharged story times a few times a week, and they're books, and along with the book are little literacy lessons. So it teaches you how to use books to teach pre-reading and pre-writing skills to your children in a really fun way. You can also reach out to me. We are We are launching a virtual pre-K academy, so you can tune in and sign up for that. We are going to be offering enrichment classes that help further prepare children for kindergarten at home. So for those parents that are looking for a resource in early childhood, we are here for you, and we're moving all of our classes to the virtual platform in the next week. So feel free to reach out to us and we'll give you more information about that.
Thank you, Jill. And it's hard for me not to call you Miss Jill because that's what my boys call her. And her new virtual story times are great. They've been watching and they giggle. So they're very good. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Yes. Brad, some closing thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I want everybody to ideally take away that social distancing does not have to weaken our protective relationships. And there are tools on the Arizona Adverse Childhood Experiences Consortium website to help you with those relationships. It's also important for us to know that we have to care for ourselves in order for us to care for others. And so there are good resources for self-care on that website as well. So thank you.
Thank you. And Tristy, before you start, I was going to say, since Tristy's actually a close by neighbor of mine, shall we say, we're all neighbors, and that's what this community is about. But are we going to do the charades thing? We should, right?
Love it.
All right, your closing thoughts.
You know, I actually really appreciated the panelists today. I learned a lot because it was different fields that I got exposed to tonight, and I echo all of the thoughts that were said. I totally agree. And I also feel like this is a time when we talk about relationships, whatever bubble that you've been put into that makes part of your who you're allowed to be in connection with is really, this is a good time to nurture those particular relationships and make sure that those bonds are strong. Because that is going to be a really important social support for those folks who are going through it. And similarly, making sure that self-care, I totally agree with that piece as well. That taking care of your kids starts with being able to make sure you're that strong pillar for them. And that might mean decreasing quantity to improve quality, or making sure you give yourself the grace of knowing that you're not in it by yourself right now.
Right, it feels like an isolating time, but that's why I think we're all here, and we're so grateful for all of you to come together to help us connect so we don't feel isolated. We feel like there are a path forward, there are solutions. You know, when I was actually a couple of days ago preparing this, my older son came up to me, and this is my closing thought, and he said, "Oh, what is it about?" And I told him, and I've been struggling with these questions myself, right? How much do I tell them? They're young. And he said, "Oh, the virus. Yeah. Love makes the virus fall apart, Mommy." And I thought, okay, I need to educate you a little more, but I love that so much. And I kind of want to leave, like there's a reality factor I want them to have, and we're learning that with good hygiene and things like that. But it's also such an important message, I think, that this is a time for all of you that are joined us tonight, for all of you as panelists, and to just stay connected, to support each other. You know, we can be kind and we can get through this together. So I am so grateful for all of you, so grateful for everyone that tuned in. This will be a live replay that's available, so feel free to share it. And if there are interest in more conversations like this, let us know. And we'll send all the information that the panelists have recommended over the next day or two out in email. So thank you all so much.